David Booth, a 23-year-old office manager living in Cincinnati, Ohio, had a recurring nightmare that haunted him for 10 days. He would go on to describe the experience, saying, quote, "It wasn't like a dream. It was like I was standing there, watching the whole thing like watching television." What he saw was an American Airlines plane veer off a runway, flip over, crash, and burn. He contacted the Federal Aviation Administration at the Greater Cincinnati International Airport on May 22, 1979, as well as American Airlines, to describe what he had dreamt. Surprisingly, rather than dismiss him, they actually heard his story and took it into account. Aside from the airline and the accident, the FAA was able to surmise from his description that the plane involved was either a DC-10 or a Boeing 727. Still, they had no real way of knowing which plane he had dreamt about or what date his premonition was settled on. Booth also reached out to a psychiatrist from the University of Cincinnati to help him cope with the realism of his horrifying nightmares. He experienced the last nightmare in the sequence on May 24th, without knowing that the next day he would be hearing that reality had caught up. On May 25th, 1979, a DC-10 labeled American Airlines Flight 191 taking off from O'Hare International Airport in Chicago crashed only minutes into the flight. One of the engines had separated from a wing, damaging the hydraulic system of the airplane as well as some essential wires. The pilot lost control, and the plane drove into a trailer park. Just as he had dreamt, the plane crashed and flipped over. The police investigation on the matter saw Booth interviewed, but he was never suspected of foul play. On the other hand, American Airlines was found guilty of neglecting to give the plane necessary maintenance, instead choosing to keep it in operation with a short-term, unapproved fix to an engine problem. Interestingly enough, American actress Lindsay Wagner was reportedly expected to board Flight 191, but felt sick at the airport and increasingly ill as boarding time approached, so she decided not to board. The claim goes that she felt relieved as soon as she exited the airport. Ever get your own strange premonition that you might be being watched? Protect yourself online by fully encrypting your internet connection with Surfshark VPN. Visit surfshark.deals/dark5 or click on the link in the description and use promo code DARK5 to get 83% off Surfshark VPN and 1 month free. Surfshark VPN is the ideal solution for privacy-minded individuals. Get rid of targeted ads that seem to know every website you've visited. Stop companies from charging you higher prices based on your browsing habits. Access the entertainment you want to see without streaming services tracking your location. Surfshark is nearly unlimited. Use it on as many devices as you want at the same time and on virtually any platform. Support Dark5 and protect yourself online by signing up today. Visit surfshark.deals/dark5 or click on the link in the description. Use the promo code DARK5 to get 83% off Surfshark VPN and 1 month free. With a 30-day money-back guarantee, try it out yourself and experience how Surfshark VPN can improve your digital life today. Sailor McRae. On March 29, 1974, a news story appeared in the St. Petersburg Times about a man disturbed by a dream of his that turned into reality. A married couple, John and Glenda Lennon, set out on a boat from a bait house in Homosassa, Florida in September of 1970. The bait house was operated and owned by Duncan McRae, who would come to have the haunting dream. Once they were in Gulf waters, Mrs. Lennon took to sunbathing on a rubber raft tied to the boat. Reportedly, at 2 p.m., the raft rolled over and she fell into the water. Mrs. Lennon did not know how to swim. A current going at 8 knots an hour took her, and by the time her husband noticed and went into the water after her, she was yards away. John was able to catch up with his beloved, but nighttime was closing in by the time he did, and he no longer had the strength to swim them both back to the boat. Instead, he gave her his swimming fins and asked her to keep floating as he went back to get help. It was fully dark by the time he returned to the boat, from which he radio called the Coast Guard and Marine Patrol. He took the boat to where he had last seen her, but could not find her. Exhausted and dehydrated, John went back to the bait house, arriving at 9:30 p.m. Owner McRae said the man was speaking incoherently in frantic panic and exhaustion, so he sent Mr. Lennon to rest and went with the Marine Patrol and Coast Guard to search for the man's wife. They had no luck locating her, and returned by 3:30 in the morning, at which time John explained what had happened, and that his wife could not swim. They believed Glenda was as good as dead. McRae went to bed and dreamt that he was piloting an unknown boat in the Gulf waters, where he found the woman, alive and floating. He woke up disturbed, knowing this was the least likely scenario to play out. Since his own boat was undergoing repairs, He borrowed one he had never piloted before, accompanied by 2 other people. The boat had no compass or navigating instruments, so the sun was his only point of reference. With this major complication, he entered the Gulf waters, and minutes in, noticed a shape in the distance. Determined, McRae led the boat to Glenda, who after 20 hours was still floating and alive, despite not knowing how to swim. The sequence of events would bother McRae for years, as in his own words, quote, "Because you see, it couldn't have happened exactly the way it did in my dream. But it did." Errol May Jones. The United Kingdom was shaken on October 21, 1966, when a National Coal Board colliery spoil tip, or waste pile, fell from the mountain in Aberfan and swallowed a portion of the village, including the local junior school with 116 children. There were 7 mining waste piles in the slopes of the mountains above the town. The 7th one, begun in 1958, was partly on ground that held openings for water springs. The disaster was caused after 3 weeks of rainfall saturated the springs. As they burst out, around 140,000 cubic yards, or 110,000 cubic meters of mining debris, slid on top of Aberfan. In the end, it was discovered that NCB had violated its own rules and the law, so it was held responsible for the disaster. The event is well known in the United Kingdom and around the globe, but what few knew is that one of the victims dreamt the event before it happened. Errol May Jones was only 10 years old. On October 20th, she woke up, having dreamt that she went to school but couldn't enter because a black substance was on top of it. She shared the dream with her mother, who broadly dismissed it as what it was, a dream. Coupled with the premonition, her parents reported that the entire week before the accident she'd been exhibiting strange behavior. At one point, she told her mother she was not afraid of death because when she died, she would join 2 former schoolmates who had passed away in unrelated circumstances. At 7:30 a.m. on the 21st, the spoil tip sank 20 feet. At 9:15, the mudslide swallowed 18 houses and the school in a matter of seconds. Abraham Lincoln. U.S. President Abraham Lincoln may have foreseen his own assassination in a dream. The story of this dream was written down in the memoir Recollections of Abraham Lincoln by Lincoln's bodyguard and loyal friend, Colonel Ward Hill Lamon. According to Colonel Lamon, 3 people were present when the president shared the dream, only a few days before April 14, 1865, the day he was shot by Confederate supporter John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater. Lincoln first spoke about the role dreams play in the Bible, asserting that in his readings he understood that God and his angels visited humans in their sleep, which he personally did not believe. After sharing that with those present, among whom was his wife, First Lady Mary Todd, he described that in the dream he was at the White House, sensing death. He could hear cries, but could not determine their origin. In the dream, he spent time opening and closing the brightly lit rooms of the presidential residence, searching desperately for the person weeping. In the East Room, he found soldiers standing guard around a corpse in funeral attire, while people in the room wept. As reported in the memoir, Lincoln asked one of the soldiers in the dream who the dead person was, and the answer was, quote, "The president. He was killed by an assassin." Carl Jung. Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss celebrated psychoanalyst and psychiatrist who extensively collaborated with Sigmund Freud. Jung would go on to work on dream analysis after writing an introduction for Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams in 1899. Yet none of his explanations about the human psyche ever truly addressed the bizarre experience he had with a number of nightmares, combined with visions he started having in October of 1913. He covered these in his 1961 book, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Reportedly, the situation manifested itself as a vision while on a trip. According to Jung, he saw a flood covering the lowlands between the Alps and the sea, but felt that the Swiss mountains rose higher to protect the country. He had a feeling of dread, and saw yellow waves taking the, quote, floating rubble of civilization, and the drowned bodies of uncounted thousands. According to him, this lasted about an hour. 2 weeks later, he reported seeing the same thing, along with a voice telling him to, quote, look at it well. It is wholly real, and it will be so. It's unclear from his written recollections whether he had experienced all of this while asleep or awake, though the writing seems to imply that he was awake, as there's a distinction between him calling this a vision and calling the following dreams. His written account of the dreams he experienced goes as follows, quote, soon afterward, in the spring and early summer of 1914, I had a thrice-repeated dream that in the middle of summer an Arctic cold wave descended and froze the land to ice. I saw, for example, the whole of Lorraine